Today's masterclass is focused on getting ready to deliver a successful retrofit program, building the foundations for success. The focus is on the social housing fund, but to be honest, it's quite scheme agnostic and could be used for any project and retrofit scheme that you're delivering. So today's agenda kind of runs through foundations to delivery plans and kind of setting your project up for success, looking at developing those robust delivery plans, best practices for procurement, contract management, the strategies for setting clear expectations and avoiding common pitfalls when it comes to contractor management, fostering strong collaborative relationships with contractors, so making sure it's that kind of two-way partnership. And then we've got a summary and some key resources as well, and Sophia will be sharing some polls for feedback throughout as well. So yeah, starting with kind of developing a robust delivery plan. So a delivery plan is basically just a strategic document that outlines how a project or work will be executed and delivered. It acts as a roadmap that guides a project from inception to completion. And it's important to put together a delivery plan for your retrofit project, so your strategic leadership team have got oversight of what's going on and what kind of the expected outputs of the project are. Obviously, aiming towards meeting your net zero goals, which might be 2050 or it might be brought further forward than that. Utilising funding, kind of maximising any grant that you have got for your projects. You know, that's the kind of idea of a delivery plan, is to set out those milestone tasks, and by following it, you know that you're going to commit and spend all your funding. But also, yeah, importantly, that supply chain management. So having that really strong oversight of supply chain, but that really good partnership working that works for both you and your contractors. Retrofit projects present kind of unique challenges, especially compared to when you're looking at new build developments. They require careful planning and strong partnerships with contractors who understand the complexities of working with these existing buildings. So this context and challenge is taken from an article around London's retrofit revolution, what's going wrong. So these are just some of the figures pulled out of that. So London is retrofitting its homes 10 times slower than needed to hit net zero by 2030. 42% exceed initial budgets by more than 20%. So that's probably something you've seen quite often, particularly where programs are a couple of years long. Obviously, you've got to factor in things like inflation, contingency. So you can't just kind of have a static budget when you're looking at it. It needs to take into account lots and lots of different facts and figures. 73% of project managers cite poor data for creating significant gaps between planned and necessary retrofit measures. This is something we hear quite a lot from both grant recipients and the supply chain as well. Supply chain are often kind of given poor data, which they then have to price works off, but also start, carrying out surveys from. They then find that actually the data on the homes is completely incorrect. Things need to be redone, which lengthens out kind of program times, costs, and kind of just that poor quality, which can be detrimental at the start of your project and cause a downfall early on. Main causes are inadequate planning, ambiguous scope definition, disconnected stakeholders, and reactive problem solving. So that was all in that article, which we can link to you at the end. But yeah, some of the kind of key issues, lessons learned, I suppose we've seen around kind of managing budgets poorly. So poor financial planning, contractors misaligning costs to win work. So that won't be something you've seen through frameworks. So yeah, really doing your homework and checking on those costs. Again, making sure when the program lasts a few years, like the SHF is, that they are factoring in, inflation every year, contingencies for unforeseen repairs or major works that need doing to the property before you could actually complete the retrofit works. And also just kind of the kind of nature, which is where it's really useful to work with your finance teams to plan for that, as they'll be doing that across, the other kind of portfolio of works. Poor data. So as I said, incorrect desktop data, which can cause kind of all sorts of issues from incorrect pricing, incorrect measure selection, properties that actually are not even eligible, which then can obviously slow down your projects. It means you've got to start again with a lot of the data analysis. One of the ways to overcome that is actually doing proper site surveys, maybe doing your retrofit assessments early, doing new EPCs, particularly with the introduction of the new SAP 10. So making sure the data is kind of up to date and accurate as possibly can be. Something we see quite often is that retrofit assessments are still poor quality. There's a kind of a lot of disparity between how they're being delivered. And we hear a lot that if the retrofit assessment is done poorly at the start, it can kind of cause the whole project to fall down. If the information is wrong, it's going to be wrong for the coordinator, the designer, the installer. There's lots of different parties who rely on that retrofit assessment to be correct. So if there's issues with it, make sure you have someone checking it or maybe on a sample basis, and they go straight back to the assessor to correct any issues straight away. Scope changes, so unintended repairs, enabling works, lack of planning, resident issues and engagement. We see that quite a lot. You can't always foresee scope changes, so I suppose it's worth planning that into your project plan or a delivery plan to make sure you have a time frame allowed for kind of scope changes, particularly at the pre-planning stage, where you've got things like enabling works, you've got any kind of damp and mold remedial repair works, you've got lots of surveys, asbestos removals. There's so many things. I think we're going to do an advice pack and a masterclass actually in the future on that kind of that pre-planning stage, because there's so many things to think about: planning surveys, ecology surveys, like what all these kind of things that could potentially happen. It's worth thinking about and then including them in your delivery plan as well. So that's just a bit of an intro. Moving on to how you actually develop a robust delivery plan. So this could be in the form of your project plan, and as long as it's kind of really detailed, includes graphics which cover a roadmap from inception to completion. So I mean, if you Google a delivery plan, some really good ones online, like very visual, but have all the kind of detail on there that everyone that can pick up. And one thing is kind of around succession. So we see quite a few issues with project managers like leaving the business or going on sick leave, or going on annual leave, someone coming in to cover, and they're really struggling to kind of pick up the processes and stuff of the project. So it's also a really useful way to kind of iron out everything they need to do, roles and responsibilities, so that anyone could just come into that organization, pick up the plan and know exactly where they need to be going from. So you want to break down the project into manageable phases, set realistic deadlines for each milestone, and define specific deliverables for each phase. You want to create a comprehensive timeline for the project. So you might use a project management tool. I can think of Prince 2, but there's obviously lots of others, to track your progress and to adjust the schedule as needed to accommodate changes. You want to identify the necessary resources for each phase, ensure resources are available when needed, and monitor resource usage to prevent over-allocation. So this is covering a phased approach to retrofit, and most successful retrofit projects will follow this 4-phase approach. Pretty standard, and it aligns with the requirements kind of under the scheme standards like PAS 2035 as well. So it begins with a thorough assessment to understand the building's current performance and identify opportunities. So that could cover things like your desktop data review, which is kind of at pre-bid phase, and also then building on that, you look at kind of stock condition surveys, EPC data, and ideally some retrofit assessments as well. As part of that assessment phase as well, you might get surveys done. You might start to think about some more technical surveys that you need doing as well. So anything that potentially might hold up your project, start thinking about that assessment phase stage. The design phase then translates these opportunities into technical specifications that meet regulatory requirements. So taking all the information from the assessment, particularly if we look at the retrofit assessment as gathering the kind of main data sources that you need, all the information that the retrofit coordinator and the retrofit designer will need, and any other specific technical kind of specs, like if you were doing an air source heat pump, for example, you probably need to get a heat pump surveyor to come in and do a proper survey of the property to identify exactly what that specification looks like. Yeah, I suppose if you haven't kicked off any like asbestos surveys, any other surveys at the assessment phase, design phase is where those surveyors doing the technical specs will be able to identify other surveys that need doing at that stage. It could be that you need to do an ecology survey because an insulation surveyor has identified there's some bats roosting in the loft or something like that. Moving on to the implementation phase. So this is where the actual physical work happens. So it could be called installation phase instead, I suppose. So this is where the contractors it's their main part of the process. And the other two, you might have in-house staff doing it, or you might have a kind of PAS 2035 consultant or independent coordinator and assessor carrying out those phases. They need to work really closely with the installers to make sure they've got the correct information. The coordinator will manage the whole process, so they should be managing stuff with the resident, liaising with the installer to make sure they're putting stuff as according to the design phase part. Potentially, obviously, that's the most disruptive phase as well. So worth thinking about how you're planning in your resident engagement, just any disruption. I think we've got some listed around kind of systems decommissioning and recommissioning. That's really important to think about how that's going to be planned in. You can't leave residents without hot water, for example, for a long period of time. So it's important for the installers to plan that in, but also get that into your delivery plan. Yeah, I mentioned occupancy, kind of resident management during the installation phase, but obviously we do a lot at Rise on resident engagement. So very key to bring them in, right at the start to the resident journey. But that installation phase is obviously key to their involvement and keeping them happy and on board as part of the works. Logical sequencing of retrofit work measures is a good one as well. So one thing I think most people now will advocate for is carrying out ventilation works at the start. I know some GRs during delivery have struggled with completing works and then trying to get back in to do ventilation, and residents just simply not letting them, which means you can't lodge it through Trustmark. It's not compliant with PAS. So yeah, that's kind of just that phasing approach of the measures, thinking about how you are best to manage it. Another example would be kind of if you've got scaffolding up for your EWI, for example, that's a good opportunity to use the scaffolding costs to then put on PV on the roof as well. So rather than then different scaffolding company having to come and do works, it's just less disruption, and the resident will know what's going on a bit better. A lot of so temporary service accommodations, that kind of, a lot of that will come into the assessment phase, so where you identify things might need to be moved. Obviously one of the common things with EWI is having to kind of sheath electricity cables or move meter boxes, so getting either the DNO or the energy provider to come in and support with that process, identifying those early on, because they can take a while to get the DNO to come out to sort them out. If there's any temporary accommodation, actually potentially the resident, if they're doing major works, or if they've got potential vulnerabilities, which means they can't be in the house when the work's going on, that needs to be considered. And then so I think that stuff's around resident engagement, mock-up testing and validation before full-scale implementation, so that working through the residents so they know how it should look. The final phase is the verification phase, which confirms that the retrofit has achieved its goals before the final handover. So I think best practice is actually doing all the kind of post-works documentation together. So getting the kind of post-install EPC, the retrofit coordinator handover, the installer handover, all to be done at a similar time, so that you can confirm that, the house has achieved the goals that it was set out to, but also the resident and installers kind of all on the same wavelength and understanding of all the kind of new stuff that's gone into the property. So yeah, verification phase, but obviously you can change some of the wording of this, and potentially it will match the PAS 2035 kind of stages anyway. So yeah, there's a lot around resident engagement here for seamless delivery, which is obviously massive support. Yeah, as I said, we run lots of boot camps and sessions around resident engagement. It still comes up as a concern and an issue, so still something that's really high focus. Lessons learned is really useful to review between phases, particularly if you're kind of doing it through the challenge fund route, where you'll be putting through kind of mini projects into your scheme, so you can kind of learn for the next phase that you need to improve certain areas. And then contingency planning for unexpected discoveries. Yeah, plan that into your delivery plan, because it's going to happen. I don't think there's any projects that have actually avoided any changes or scope creep or anything. So worth thinking, factoring that in, and working out how you're going to manage it, whether that looks like additional resources, additional contractors, and then obviously the finances is the big one. So another really useful thing to develop as part of your delivery plan is the roles and responsibility matrix, or the RACI matrix. It's a project management tool which clarifies team roles and responsibilities across different tasks. You could include this, to be honest, as part of your main delivery plan, although it's probably a bit confusing, so probably worth creating a separate RACI matrix. It clearly outlines the project goals and objectives. It ensures all stakeholders align with the project's vision, and it establishes measurable success criteria. So yeah, basically you would assign each of your project roles, including contractors, any kind of third-party organisations, installers, financial, legal support that you might have, and list out kind of all the different roles, and work out who's got primary responsibility, but who's also involved with supporting role and needs to have input and oversight. Kind of will also help you kind of plan out meetings, and who needs to be involved in program meetings or weekly or daily calls, for example, and yeah, keeps everybody accountable for their own kind of tasks and actions as well. So just a list of components of an effective delivery plan. A good delivery plan consists of the following. So realistic timelines with critical path analysis and buffer periods. As I said, things like prelim works, contingency, likely to happen. So don't just kind of think that you can rush straight into the works unless you've got very, very good oversight with stock and things haven't changed in the meantime, which could be possible if you're maybe working on a smaller scale. But yeah, be realistic with timelines. Allow good buffer periods for things to change and go wrong. Clear project milestones and stage gate decision points. So yeah, linking kind of milestones to what's in the guidance, but also your own kind of internal delivery project teams, milestones, and anything you've got to share with your kind of senior leadership team as well as updates to the program. Resource allocation strategies and capacity planning. So again, resourcing will probably be slightly separate to your main project plan, but really good to, before you even start, pull out a bit of a skills matrix to identify exactly who you've got in your team and maybe any gaps that you might have that you need to recruit for. And then also, that kind of resource allocation. So how much like FTE has each person got, and can you confirm that they have, working with kind of your HR teams, your senior leadership to ensure that they've got the capacity to deliver. Supply chain analysis and procurement lead times. So doing really early engagement or market analysis on your supply chain and factoring in a very decent lead time for procurement activities. And again, leaving probably a buffer for any overspill with procurement changes to kind of specifications because of poor data, which we discussed earlier. And I think just with the nature of the new Procurement Act, the lead times are taking a little bit longer, just with organisations' kind of policies. So probably a slight extension since the new Procurement Act came into place. So just worth thinking about those lead times. Or if you've got a procurement team, work with them closely to work out, what they work to, because I know we used to work to kind of 6 weeks, which was pretty quick, but that was an individual thing. So work with your teams and those experienced with procurement to put in your own lead times. Risk management protocols and contingency planning. So obviously completing a risk register, keeping that updated. It's part of the SHF reporting anyway. So you keep this as your own plan, and potentially when they come off the risk register for reporting purposes, you've still got a record on your own, whether they've been reduced down the risks or whether they've become issues. You can monitor that and then use it also for kind of lessons learned and future program management as well. Contingency planning can link to your kind of risk management in terms of your mitigations and stuff. So worth covering those off in that register. Quality assurance and verification framework. So how you'll handle that kind of handover process. Different organisations still seem to do it slightly differently, whether it is just kind of you're just getting it done as and when you have people available. I know some organisations try and get the coordinator, the installer, the EPC assessor there all in the same day to try and do that handover all in one go, and you can kind of factor that in. And as part of that quality assurance as well, the retrofit coordinator will have the role to sign all the works off and ensure they're happy. And you might have additional QA off the back of that. And then, handover and post-completion evaluation processes, which I've kind of covered, but I suppose it could go on slightly longer term than that last day handover. Looking forward into evaluation, which you probably set out at the start of your program as to how you'll actually evaluate success of the project. Thinking about, so your project doesn't just finish when actually your KPIs are due to deliver. You've got a 6-12 month kind of review period of gathering customer feedback or satisfaction, but also potentially, monitoring EPC improvements, fuel bill savings, all those kind of good quantitative data sets that you can collect as well. So moving on to procurement and contract management best practices. So I think we've focused a lot on procurement. So these just go over it in a very high level. But we've got lots of detail if you want to have a look on the RISE website about kind of effective procurement strategies. Hopefully most of you are at this stage or have moved past this stage already and you've got contractors on board, but useful just to keep thinking about it. And also procurement doesn't necessarily end at the start. Some people might have carried over contractors, therefore they've got to re-procure in a year or so, or some it's just about how you monitor those contracts going forward. So effective procurement for retrofit projects often means involving contractors early to benefit from their practical experience. Pre-qualification should prioritise previous retrofit experience, especially with similar archetypes. Value-based selection rather than simply choosing the lowest bid often leads to better outcomes, and I think that's generally accepted now, and you see a lot more tenders based around value rather than cost these days. Finally, clear scope definition from the start helps reduce costly variations later in the project. So data is a big one. We hear it a lot from supply chain that they'll get kind of a list of homes that they then start surveying, and all the information is completely wrong, and it makes the whole process very hard for them, but it just lengthens out everything, because it means there's a lot of back and forth then about pricing and kind of variations to the original contract. Those that are clearly set out at the start know exactly what they're planning on doing, and the data's fairly accurate. Residents are on board, so actually they know that there's not going to be limited refusals. Those ones obviously will have more success. Less variation will be needed. Yeah, early contractor involvement, so ideally some market research. And yeah, if you've worked with certain contracts before and you've been impressed, then definitely carry on that relationship. But also talking to other kind of local authorities, housing associations, about how their relationships with contracts have gone, picking up on any positives and any recommendations is always useful learnings. You know, talked about retrofit experience and the value-based selection and your clear scope. So yeah, covered all of those things. So just a little bit on contract structures for retrofit projects. I'm not an expert on this, and I'd say, to be honest, go to your procurement team or maybe like framework providers to support with this. But yeah, essentially different contract structures suit different retrofit scenarios. And yeah, some of you might be starting to look at this. I think generally traditional contracts, they work well when the scope is clearly defined. So there's clear scope and fixed price. Design and build contracts, they provide single point responsibility, which can reduce risk. They're generally the ones that I've seen under kind of building works. It's what contractors are most used to from my experience. So yeah, the single point responsibility will sit with the contractor to do the design and the installation. The energy performance contracts include guaranteed savings, aligning contract incentives with energy outcomes. It's not something I've actually come across, so it'd be interesting to see if many people have used those. But yeah, kind of looking around guaranteed savings. There's some stuff in the eco world about pay for performance, which is really interesting, and I think that would align to that. So it's around actual like monitoring of improvements rather than kind of basing it on desktop data, essentially. So contractors would be paid on actual real life improvements, which can be tracked via data monitors and loggers and stuff like that. Framework agreements, they work well for organisations planning multiple retrofits and allow long-term partnerships to develop. So quite often you can kind of call off on the frameworks where you just want to extend people you've been working with previously. Quite easy normally to direct award on those as well, so it's normally a simpler route. But yeah, generally I would get advice from procurement managers or maybe your legal team on how this looks, and obviously get them to look through any contracts before things are signed as well. So just a little example on contractor selection framework and how you might go about doing it. So you need to set your selection criteria weighting. As I said, I remember back, when I used to run some about 6-7 years ago, it would kind of just be price 50%, quality 50%, but there seems to be a massive change in how that's delivered now. So this example is price at 30%, experience at 25%, methodology 25%, capacity at 20%. And the pre-qualification process covers things like financial stability, technical capacity, and relevant experience. You could then carry out technical interviews and scenario-based assessments with the contractors. You review past performance evaluation and reference verification. You look into innovation capacity and problem-solving capabilities. So that's a really interesting thing to start looking at. How, what can they do further on top of the kind of standard retrofit works, and like what examples have they got where they've used innovation to drive forward kind of capacity and capability and success of programs. Their environmental and social value commitments, obviously a massive part of any project, but the supply chain, and you might have your own internal social value commitments. There's also kind of commitments through the warm home schemes itself, and then the contractors will quite often have their own as well. So it's kind of a combination of all, but looking at how you're going to evaluate that is really key as well. Supply chain resilience and subcontractor management. So yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff that will go into that. Looking at relevant and previous experience, how they would, that kind of, that resilience building, how they would plan for any issues, looking at kind of annual turnovers, how long they've been in place for, maybe speaking to some of the senior management, speaking to others about what their experience is with them, how confident they are of using them. And then subcontractor management, if they are using that model, how they will manage that and how you'll still get information passed to you easily, like how the communication will still work effectively. So just looking quickly at payment models and incentives. So part of the Warm Homes guidance is to support and upskill the supply chain. So we do need to make sure contractors are being paid timely and fairly to ensure the growth in this sector is seen. However, you can use a payment structure to guarantee quality and performance, ensuring these don't have a negative impact on any parties. So obviously you want to kind of make sure this works for all parties. And we do know that a lot of the smaller contractors obviously will struggle if they don't get paid within their terms. But obviously if this sets out as part of the procurement stage, then they know what they're getting themselves into. But looking at things like stage payments linked to milestones, retention provisions for quality assurance. So you might pay them kind of at certain stages and not until everything is 100% signed off, maybe even signed off with the trust QA checks, that you will give them the kind of final payments. Shared savings incentives for performance and early completion bonuses as well, which would drive forward kind of positive program for all. And also potentially, if you complete with the program quicker than you thought it was, there actually could potentially be other funding opportunities on the horizon which you can gather if you've been delivering well. So yeah, payment structure should align contract incentives with project goals. Stage payments should link to milestones to ensure progress stays on track. Retention provisions are typically at 2.5% to 5%, and they protect against quality issues. Obviously, quality issues kind of was mentioned around EWI, IWI a couple of months ago. So still lots of checking and QAing going on of all retrofit measures. So definitely worth thinking about including that into your contract with your contractor about how that will be managed, so that if there are issues that come 3 months after everyone's left site, that you can still get them to go back to finish any work off. What's the incentive for them to go back if they've finished everything, have been paid? For energy retrofits, consider sharing savings incentives that reward contractors for exceeding performance targets. And early completion bonuses can be affected, especially for projects where minimising disruption is critical. So moving on to kind of contractor management best practices. So once contracts are signed, active management is essential. You want to hold regular progress reviews, comparing things like your actual against the planned progress. So looking at your KPIs, any other milestones and KPIs you might have internally. You want to establish formalised change control procedures that everyone understands before changes are needed. So it's that scope creep, which is likely to happen in a majority of projects, but how you manage it and come together and it's formalised. You want to ensure all correspondence and decisions are documented. So within kind of your delivery plan, you might have an actions log which you go through at every program meeting, capture any major decisions and then follow up on any actions as well. You want to create clear escalation pathways so issues don't kind of languish unresolved. Communication strategy with contractors is key to success. So again, that's worth developing at the start and working with contractors potentially to work out how they best communicate as well. Potentially bringing your comms team to support with that process also in terms of kind of how to manage effective communications. So moving on to the strategies for setting clear expectations and avoiding common pitfalls. So defining success criteria. Success criteria must be defined before work begins. For retrofits, these typically include specific energy performance targets, clear budget parameters, schedule constraints, especially for occupied buildings, quality standards for all installations, and metrics for occupant comfort. Having these documented and agreed by all parties creates clarity and reduces disputes. So yeah, probably in your kickoff meeting with your contractor and your whole project management team, you want to run through these main kind of success criteria so that everyone knows that what they're working towards. It also means you can monitor them and then share that with your senior leadership team, monitor it in a close manner, that any outputs or any final reports that you're able to capture against those targets. These are just some examples of some common pitfalls and some effective mitigation strategies. Success criteria. So yeah, these success criteria kind of must be defined before work even begins. So as I said, in the kickoff meeting is the best time for this. You might want to bring it in earlier than that, to be honest. It's a kind of an internal discussion you then share with your external team as well. So yeah, some of the things we see are inadequate building surveys, unrealistic, inadequate commissioning time, occupant disruption performance expectations, and poor sequencing of work. So I think I mentioned all of these earlier, actually, so I won't go through them in any more detail. But yeah, common pitfalls include unrealistic schedules. So warning signs would be a compressed critical path. So actually you're noticing those timings do not look realistic at all at the start, or as part of kind of a lessons learned to continually monitor throughout your program. You kind of change those timeframes and carry out an independent schedule review, get someone else to look at it as well to get their opinion on it. Inadequate contingency. So this example is a warning sign as less than 10% contingency. I suppose I think the figure we always used to advise was above 10%, but everyone's got different ways of calculating it. So as long as you've kind of thought about how you will calculate that contingency, it does depend on, the quality of data, type of housing stock, maybe age of housing stock. So lots of factors that need to go into it, and every organisation will be slightly different. But the mitigation strategy around looking at risk-based contingency calculation, working with finance teams to work out what that looks like, and the contractors as well, to be honest. Poor stakeholder engagement, so late stage objections from residents mainly, I think that example would be. So as I said earlier, bringing the residents on board really early and mapping out that kind of resident journey throughout the programme. Things like I said, installing ventilation before the measures take place, knowing that they are likely to get more incentive out of the works being done afterwards. They're more likely to gain access to complete the retrofit measures than the ventilation. So stakeholder mapping, maybe focusing on any particularly vulnerable customers, those that are on your housing management system. They are there's lots of flags around them being difficult to contact, difficult to manage, working with housing teams and other ones who know the resident well to support them in making sure the retrofit works can go ahead. Insufficient technical specifications, so numerous requests for information, RFIs, just delay and just cause unnecessary paperwork and pull on resourcing. So you could use a third-party technical review at that stage. Scope creep, warning signs would be frequent change requests, and the mitigation strategy is change impact assessment process. And the last pitfall here is the communication breakdown. So information silos, maybe residents complaining to your call centre that they've not heard from the installer or the resident liaison officer and not had an update. Those kind of things you probably see commonly. So that's around like a communication strategy, having those regular check-ins and workshops with the whole project team to ensure everyone's on the same comms strategy. So actually moving on to communication. So you want to develop a comprehensive communication framework, and failures are at the heart of many project problems. So you want to start with stakeholder mapping to understand who needs what information and when. You want to establish a regular reporting cadence that all parties commit to. Obviously, particularly with SHF reporting, there's a requirement. I think it's the 10th working day. So there's obviously an aim there which has to be met. So that kind of gives you could work backwards from that, knowing that all the other parties will need to communicate those by that point. Use multiple communication channels for different types of information and create feedback loops that allow for continuous improvement throughout the project life cycle. So structured meeting hierarchy will be broken down by strategic, where you have monthly high-level oversight updates, and you might bring in your senior leadership teams occasionally to those just to give them an update. Tactical, which your weekly progress tracking and issue resolution. Generally your installers would kind of be on that call. I think a weekly. That should say weekly on the slide. I'll make sure that's updated. But I think a weekly is a good enough cadence. Obviously, you then fall into daily potentially when you're at the kind of installation phase, where there's lots of things that could go wrong and lots of kind of intricate parts to it. So you need to be having that kind of daily comms with those on site. The resident potentially needs the support from like an RLO to deal with any kind of coordination and immediate problem solving that's required. So fostering strong collaboration, collaborative relationships with contractors. So looking at kind of the traditional approaches around how you manage that relationship with contractors. So you've got the transactional approach, which is very much focused on contract terms and enforcement. So win-lose mentality. There's limited time for knowledge sharing, and it's very much reactive problem resolution. So this is probably kind of where you could put in a minimal amount, but actually it means your project could fully fall down. A partnership approach looks at aligned objectives and shared success matrix, open book transparency and joint problem solving, knowledge transfer and capability building, long-term relationship development, shared incentives and mutual benefits. So essentially go for the partnership approach. It seems like it's a lot better way forward and beneficial for all parties, which is more likely to provide a good relationship and successful project. See how many slides I've got left. Okay, not too many. So building contractor partnerships. So true partnerships begin with shared project objectives that align commercial interests. Transparent decision-making builds trust between parties. A joint problem-solving approach recognises that issues will arise and focus on solutions rather than blame. And formally recognising mutual success helps reinforce the partnership through the project, and having those shared project objectives that align commercial interests. So contract management, so specific methods can foster collaboration. Consider co-locating key team members, even part-time, to improve communication. Utilise digital collaboration platforms that provide a single source of truth for project information. Run integrated design workshops at key project stages, and implement shared knowledge management systems so lessons learnt benefits all parties. A performance management should support collaboration rather than create conflict. Begin with clear measurable KPIs agreed upon by all parties. Conduct regular performance reviews to focus on improvement rather than criticism. Establish constructive feedback mechanisms that flow in both directions, and maintain a continuous improvement focus throughout the project. So yeah, just some really kind of useful things to implement into that contract management processes and set out at the start of the program so that all parties know what they're going to be accountable for and what they need to be reporting on. So just building on how to build a collaborative relationship, you want to build trust through transparency and honesty. Encourage open communication and feedback. So you want to hear the good as well as the bad. You know, you want that open and honest feedback, and you want to be able to make installers feel like they can be comfortable with that. You recognise and reward good performance, resolve conflicts amicably. So how to resolve conflict. So even the best partnerships, conflicts arise, and they should do. Like, you should be able to feel like, even if you've got a really good relationship with a contractor, that, you know, you can raise issues or potential conflicts. They will arise, and you feel comfortable in raising them with those partners. The identification of issues does prevent escalation. Nip them in the bud, I think, is the saying, before they become an actual issue, potentially at the risk stage, which is why you develop a robust risk register and mitigation strategy. A fact-based discussion approach removes emotion from problem solving. So keeping kind of a log of actions, decisions is really key to make sure, potentially some of these issues don't become a problem. Keeping focus on project objectives helps maintain perspective. So always linking back to, those goals, those project goals, what you are aiming to achieve, monitoring those throughout to see how closely aligned you are and if you're on track to achieve the programme. A documented resolution process ensures clarity, and treating disputes as learning opportunities strengthens partnerships over time. Oh, good. I've left it with 10 minutes to go. I can't believe I took that long. Apologies. But yeah, just to summarise what we've gone through. So there's quite a lot, I suppose, a lot in high level. We kind of covered quite a few areas. I said we do go into a bit more specifics on those certain topics in other sessions, and also kind of our knowledge packs and stuff. But yeah, hopefully you were able to kind of pick up some of the main key points around building those delivery plans and working with contractors and through your procurement stages. So you want to invest time in developing comprehensive delivery plans, build collaborative partnerships focused on outcomes, set clear expectations with measurable criteria, implement robust project controls, and select contractors based on value, not just on price. There's plenty of content, so do take a look on our website if you want to look, or you can listen to stuff back on demand. So like, this will be recorded, and there's lots of other sessions that are recorded that can be looked back on. That's my contact detail, but also feel free to email the Rise inbox with any queries or questions you might have. Yeah, hopefully that's been useful to you all, but yeah, feel free to get in touch with me if there's anything else specifically